Exploring the ancient West would be incomplete without covering the area that is now known as the American Southwest. But you're not going to hear me call it that. I'm going to call it Oasis America. I like that name a little bit better. The Sonoran Desert covers most of this region. Very harsh, but very scenic terrain. Beautiful saguaro cactuses, the only place in the world where you can find the saguaro cactus. It takes about 50 years before it grows one of those defining arms that many of you may know. And if you don't know, just go look it up and be like, oh, yeah, I know what he's talking about. It's a place with great beauty, but also great risk. Of course, you can be overcome by the heat. Any of you who've driven to Phoenix in the middle of summer, 120-degree heat, you can be overcome. But then at certain periods of the year, you can be overcome by the cold. Very cold. It hosts the heart of the connection and trade between two very important places in the Western Hemisphere. Of course, the first being the North American continent. But in the ancient world, especially when the Spanish arrive in the Americas, it's Mesoamerica that is the most powerful place on the continent. Now, we're going to take a look at a creation story of the Hopi. They are of the Pueblo culture, which we will talk about, and they describe this region not as Oasis America or the American Southwest, but as the center place. And indeed, this description lends to the idea of Oasis America being the center of trade and the center of culture in North America and Mesoamerica. Mythology tells us that these Pueblo groups started with the belief in the earth, and the Pueblo people emerged as the caretakers in honor of Mother Earth. The Pueblo walked to the furthest corners searching for the center place, where they met Masa, the caretaker and creator of Mother Earth, and in their covenant with Masa, the Pueblo people's search for the center place led to their iconography of settlements marked with the spiral symbol found in the region of the Pueblo people, and of course, the construction of significant monuments. It is also widely accepted that the proliferation of ritual mounds found in North America came through the gateway that was Oasis America. Now, the ritual mounds we'll talk about are not necessarily found in the American Southwest, but we'll talk about Cahokia as being the center place on the North American continent. And they, of course, would adapt those ritual mounds within their culture, becoming very powerful and significant in the pre-Columbian period. Being a center place meant that the people of Oasis America became the appropriators and gateway of things like pottery, irrigation, and even things like the Mesoamerican ball game. Perhaps it is Oasis America's turquoise that made it the center place. Turquoise of the American Southwest brought copper hawk bells, pyrite mosaics, and macaw skeletons in exchange. This also meant that there was a lot of exchange in culture, ideas, invention that went between the North American continent and Mesoamerica and even into South America. Now, I told you I would tell you about the origins of the name Mesoamerica, and that comes from a gentleman, a German guy, by the name of Paul Kirchhoff. Kirchhoff, the same person who named the adjacent area of Central America, known as Mesoamerica, gave the area north the name of Oasis America. Kirchhoff noted the inhospitable climate, except in the areas where oasis led to large and thriving populations. Evidence of squash and maize were found in Bat Cave, New Mexico. This dates the early settlements of the region to about 3500 to 1500 BCE. And I know those are very wide ranging of numbers, but this is the ancient world. And any of these cultures in North America, with exception to, I believe, one in the North American, what we would consider the United States Northeast, were void of any type of written language. So there are expressions of communication. Of course, we could talk about pottery and even tools, weapons, garments, all the different things that were made, but not necessarily in terms of a written language or an alphabet or hieroglyphs or anything like that. So what we really have to go on are essentially what a colleague of mine says, the trash of the past, what the things that were discarded or left behind that we kind of, not we as historians, but archaeologists dig through, and then us historians write about those findings that archaeologists made. So through these ideas of agriculture and technology being imported from culture south, they believed that they were derived from an area in Mexico that those tribes are known as the Durango and Zacatecas cultures. Now, I believe that there's always been an exchange from the early days, and it's simply continued into the modern period. You know, a lot of cities in the United States have sister cities. The city that I come from, the city of Azusa, our sister city is actually Zacatecas, which is, I find, rather interesting. There's still those connections. So the technology of agriculture would lead to a quick shift from hunter-gatherers to sedentary cultures. And these sedentary cultures were fueled by complex canal systems. And when you have complex canal systems, now you're farming and you need storage. So you take those inventions found in places in what is now Mexico, and they become imports, and pottery making becomes kind of the one of the social hallmarks of the Pueblo people. And we start to see, well, how far back do these technologies come to Oasis America? And that goes back to roughly, at least scholars believe, 300 BCE. Now, the Anasazi, the Hohokam, and Mogollon, these are major cultures. They are all ancestral Pueblo people. They built monuments and had their own types of pottery and tools and all of those things. And they're going to transition from being hunter-gatherer civilizations to ones that almost entirely rely upon agriculture as their source of calories. This is believed to have occurred roughly around 3500 BCE. And they did so due to infrequent rainfall of the Southwest. Lack of consistent water made wild plants unreliable to sustain larger populations. So if their populations were ever going to grow, they would have to turn their attention to irrigation, controlling the water supply, and cultivating corn and other crops. As food is often the foundation of culture, it led to the development of tools, arts, baskets, pottery, all different types of things, all important in maintaining, cultivating, and storing food. The shift to an agrarian lifestyle led to less migration, more permanent structures, the emergence of roads, buildings, and products, and the seeking of trade routes, which would expand their cultural boundaries and their limitations that they experience within their own region. It is unclear when humans started living in the area, but there are some newer theories out there. One of the more wild theories out there, and this one fascinates me more than many of them, is that people lived in this region as hunter-gatherers some 21,000 years ago. This came out a couple of years ago. Media outlets excitedly reported that ancient footsteps found in White Sands National Park in New Mexico were believed to be some 21,000 years old based on carbon dating. Now, this adds a new wrinkle to the story of the people of the American Southwest of Oasis America, but there have been challenges to that, of course, and there always will be, I guess, until we have more definitive information. But going back to Kirchhoff, who was in many ways the pioneer of research in Mexico, most certainly. In fact, I believe he has like his own institute named after him, his own museum. That's how influential this gentleman was. Kirchhoff was, like I said, he was German, but if you go and look him up, it says Mexican German. He essentially became Mexican, which, hey man, I dig that. He probably fell in love with the food and the culture and said, nah, the weather's not bad either, right? So Kirchhoff was the one who divided Oasis America into 7 regions based on 16th century historical record. So you have the Tanauan-speaking pueblos, other pueblos like the Hopi. We'll talk a little bit about the Zuni. They're one of the first ones to make contact with the Spanish. You have the Navajo, various different groups. And of these 7 groups, you have it narrowed down to just 3 that we'll focus on. Actually, there's 5, but the big 3 are the Anasazi, the Hohokam, and the Mogollon cultures. But we'll also talk a little bit about the Pattaya and the Fremont cultures as well, because we're not just focusing on the Southwest, and we'll look more at like the Fremont cultures up further north into Utah. And of course, they'll have their own version of the Apache and the Navajo, who are somewhat the antagonists of the region, more hunter-gatherer, nomadic tribes. And then you have the Fremont culture, who is more like the Anasazi, and they're more sedentary. And then we look at the Pattaya, and they are further west into California. If you ever take the 10 freeway and cross to Colorado, that would be their region, Salton Sea region, all the way down into northern Baja California. Now, when I note the perfection of the name of Oasis America as agrarian cultures, these groups gravitated to bodies of water in the desert. And the big bodies of water are mostly rivers. The Rio Grande, you have the Colorado, the Yaqui, the Gila, and Conchos rivers. This is not like unlike other cultures around the world, almost everywhere. When you talk about South America, China, it doesn't really make a difference. Everybody needs water, and most cultures, I mean, there are always exceptions to the rules, but most large, strong, civilized cultures need a large body of water, primarily to water their crops and maintain larger populations, food storage. It brings consistency to diets, and that is how you build large, strong populations. And through those large, strong populations, you have cultures that emerge, bureaucracy, and all the layers that go along with larger civilizations. So we'll look at the region and how it develops into this balance with agricultural societies. Some played the role as the agricultural producers, and this happens again around the world. And then there are always those who are more nomadic, hunter-gatherer traditions who preyed upon sedentary societies in the area. The most notable in Oasis America were the Navajo and Apache. Both of these groups are believed to have derived from the Athapascan culture, and this culture settled in parts of New Mexico, parts of the Four Corners region, western Texas, and some parts of what is now modern-day Oklahoma. They are all part of this linguistic family called the Na-Dene language family. Their linguistic family ties take them into the Great Plains, the Plateau region, the Pacific coast, and far north into the Canadian Rockies and modern day Alaska. Now, these are the people who are believed to have been derived from those who came over the Bering Strait and then slowly migrated south. Here, the Apache and Navajo played an essential role as nomadic hunters and raiders of the ancestral Pueblo people. Now, we'll look at their impact. Of course, when the Europeans arrive, they'll take horses, adapt them to their culture of raiding and nomadic lifestyle, and they'll become some of the best horse riders in the world. The Apache and the Navajo were aggressive and unafraid to war with other cultures, but some were also very similar to some of these Pueblo cultures. Some of the Apache groups actually break down into a sort of hybrid culture where they are semi-nomadic, but also have some agriculture tied to their caloric survival. And they were very important in the region. You may say, why do you need people who are nomadic in the region who raid us from time to time? Well, they're responsible for expanding trade, and they're also responsible for the ancestral Pueblos' adaptations of their architecture, and that architecture was made in part or in large part to protect against raids from the Apache and the Navajo. So let's focus a little bit more on the Navajo here. They are believed to have broken off from the southern Athabascans of what is now Canada. They migrated into Oasis America between 200 and 1300 CE. I would imagine that it's probably difficult to nail down an exact date, primarily because they are nomadic. You're essentially looking for needles in a haystack through the whole region. So I guess nailing down a date would be rather difficult. And they weren't just raiders, but they were trade conduits for the region's Anasazi and other Pueblo peoples. The Apache are very similar. They are also derived from the same group. They split into 7 groups upon settlement in the American Southwest. There are the Kiowas, some of the most notable, Western Apaches, Lipans, and of course the Navajo. And they are similar in culture. They are very similar in their approach to the world. I guess when you look at both of these groups, they are both coming from the lens of survival, where they're saying, we hunt, and then when hunting gets bad, we will prey upon these agrarian societies, and in some ways, sometimes we will do agriculture ourselves. But this nomadic movement is something, again, seen throughout the world. So let's look at the Spanish transliteration of Apache. And this is the same name of the Zuni Pueblo for the term enemy. And it kind of makes sense, when you look at some of these cultures in the ancient world. A lot of what they do is actually very logical and very practical in their way of approaching the world. The Apache are very interesting in that they adapt to their region and their resources. Like I said, some were nomadic, while others were on the Plains Apache, semi-sedentary farmers. And then by the time we get to the 14, 15, 16, actually the 1700s, actually the Comanche show up, at least in the historical record of the Spanish, around 1706. And like I said earlier, we'll talk about that more specifically, but the Apache are almost completely eliminated by the Comanche, who are the ultimate hunter-gatherer society, we'll call them. I mean, you're talking about political power. I am kind of departing from Oasis America here because I really get excited about talking about the Comanche. It's pretty cool. So those Plains Apache who were semi-sedentary farmers and traders who lived along the Dismal River in modern-day Kansas. Those are the ones who are going to be the focal point of the Comanche, and then some others who kind of fall into some of the other territories further south, Texas and things like that. So what we'll see is alliance, culture, and lifestyle varied between the Apache and the Navajo, but they are certainly very notable in this region because of their heavy impact not only on the economy, but on the cultures of the region. So now I want to look at the Anasazi culture. One of the most critical ancient cultures of this region is the Anasazi, who inhabit the four corners of the modern United States. The Anasazi are believed to have emerged around 100 CE, though their origins go deeper, as early as 1500 BCE. That's a 1600-year difference. And their fall comes around 1600 CE. So we're talking about literally 3,000 years of a culture in this region. Again, that's not to say that these people disappeared. Again, what happens with Native American cultures is they migrate, they change, they adapt, and then they become defined as different and new cultures. But it's the same DNA, it's the same people moving and creating new things. And I guess that's the same in modern US culture too. You know, you get people from California going to Texas, they become the kind of their own thing in Texas, or they adapt to Texas culture or whatever, back and forth, people from New York ending up in LA, you know, all of that stuff. So the ancient world was no different. And so when we look at the Anasazi, their territory expands from the Rio Grande in New Mexico and into northern Arizona, into New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and their territory. Now, that's not to say the whole territory was populated or anything like that, but their general cultural influence is about 30,000 square miles from the four corners. They are the ancestors of the Pueblo cultures in the region that would clash with the Spanish colonial efforts in the late 1500s. Ancestral tribes of the Anasazi include the Hopi, the Zuni, the Acoma, the Laguna, and all of these tribes emerged into an agricultural civilization or civilizations, often sparring with their nomadic neighbors, like we talked about, the Navajo, Apache, and by the time we get to the 1700s, the Comanche as well. The name Anasazi has a somewhat controversial background. There have been a variety of origins and meanings tied to that name. Some claims it means the ancient ones, while others claim it has Navajo roots in their word, meaning ancient enemy or ancestors of the enemy. Either way, the title has remained the familiar name of the Anasazi people. And during the Archaic period of North America, the early Pueblo is considered to be part of a larger culture known as Cochise culture, primarily between 8000 BCE and 2000 BCE. They break down into the Basket Maker period and the Pueblo period. The Basket Maker period starts at the transitionary time of around 100 CE, where the Anasazi move from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a more sedentary agricultural one, ending around 750 CE, which, of course, is followed by the Pueblo period, which spans from 750 CE until Spanish contact in the 1600s. The next culture I would like to talk about, a very rich culture of the region, they are called the Hohokam. The Hohokam culture is very similar to the Anasazi people. They lived in western and southern Arizona, and their peak occurred from 100 BCE to 1500 BCE. Their name in the Pima language means the vanished ones, and the core of their culture resided along the Gila and Sal River valleys in what is now desert country. The Hohokam adapted to the sandy, dry conditions with remarkable irrigation systems that stretched as far as 10 miles. They too, with these irrigation systems, could sustain larger populations due to their agricultural advancements. Their principal village is a place you may have visited. They called it Snaketown, we call it Phoenix, where roughly 100 pit houses, with another large settlement east of Point of Pines. In this region, the Hohokam dominance, we find connections to Mesoamerican culture, such as ball courts and rubber balls, implying a solid economic and cultural relationship with their neighbors in the south who wanted goods like copper. Some of the best copper found in the world is found in North America. In fact, they say that is why Native American societies never really entered the Bronze Age, because their copper was so pure and so exceptional. Why create anything else other than what Mother Nature has provided you? So not only do you have this exceptional form of copper, but you can use it in exchange. So what happens is the cultures of the North American Southwest likely learned their methods of pottery making from those further south who wanted North American copper. The Hohokam were very innovative, and scholars believe that the Hohokam were some of the first to practice etching, starting around 1000 CE. This is a process, again, when we're talking about using local materials, this is a process that included covering shells with acid-resistant pitch from trees, and then they would carve designs. Then they soak the shells in an acidic solution made of fermented saguaro cactus fruit. We talked about only place in the world where you can find a saguaro is in the Sonoran Desert. And then you would have this magnificent piece of art. So again, adaptation, they have all of these hallmarks that we often look at, like European cultures or old world cultures, as having big cities, large populations, refined agriculture. Well, the Hohokam had all of that, and maybe even then some, because you're talking about massive trade networks, all of the things that make these ancient societies very interesting and advanced. We see that in the American Southwest, in Oasis America. And so the Hohokam were always looking for ways to trade, and as agriculturalists, they would shape the waters of the desert to accommodate their settlements over centuries. One of the best examples is the Salt River Valley. And this is at a place called Pueblo Grande. And this area peaked between 1200 and 1400 CE. And when we talk about complexity, we're talking about like the most extensive prehistoric irrigation system in North America is not in Mexico. It's not in Incan territory. It's in the American Southwest. And we have canals estimated to be running around 150 miles, 30 feet wide, some of them 10 feet deep, with diversion dams composed of either stone or brush. And we're talking about doing all of this without the wheel. Some of these canals were lined with clay at the bottom to prevent water seepage in sandier areas. You're talking a massive public works project, and the only way you're able to get these things done, one, you have the labor, but two, you could feed that labor. So these canals were believed to have been built over the course of 500 to 700 years, which shows the stability and strength of their societies and cultures, but also that you're talking a massive area in terms of acreage. And maybe you can come up with the guess. How many acres did these canals cover? 100 to 250,000 acres, which is absolutely amazing. Amazing. I mean, I wish we could travel back in time and get these individuals to come and build us a water system here in California, a water storage system. That would be absolutely wonderful. So this public works project, I like to call it, they didn't call it that, but it's a public works project in many ways. It came to support several small communities around 22 larger villages. You have Los Muertos and Pueblo Grande. These are the larger examples. And then many of these settlements, you're talking about being, again, attacked by tribes when things kind of turn sour in terms of the environment. So we'll get into how the environment is affected, especially between 1200 and 1400. There are a number of droughts. And when there are a number of droughts, that means animals aren't surviving. When animals aren't surviving, nomadic tribes are going to seek to raid agrarian societies. When they go to raid agrarian societies who are experiencing drought, there's less food, which means there's great famine, and you have all of these things happening. And what eventually happens is the decay of the society. The people in this region were waterlogged. They would waterlog their fields and move to a more friendly habitat along the Gila River, where many of those cultural elements are still thriving. I want to go to one of the smaller cultures, the Mogollon culture. Other cultures in the southwestern region would meld or have cultural crossover of what is now the United States. The Mogollon of the mountain ranges of the southern Arizona, New Mexico borderlands thrived between 300 CE, and again, there's that year, 1300 CE. We'll talk about the importance of that with a lot of the other Native American cultures, not just in the Oasis America region, but more broadly in North America. And they were also descendants of earlier Cochise culture. The Mogollon were some of the first farmers in the region and made very fine quality pottery, emerging around 300 BCE. Their pottery stored their cultivated crops of corn, beans, squash, tobacco, and cotton. When we talk about corn, beans, and squash, that is really the foundational food for most of the agrarian societies. The idea of corn, beans, and squash are called the Three Sisters. They are often planted together. They provide nutrients to one another and allow those three plants to thrive quite well. And we'll talk about that as we move forward in the course. But anyhow, the Mogollon tilled their soil with primitive digging sticks while supplementing their agriculture with wild plants and small game. By 500 CE, the hunting improved with the bow and arrow, and the Mogollon, like the Anasazi of Mesa Verde, used natural ridge lines to defend their supplies from raiding tribes. They can do so at a distance, which was much safer. They too lived in pit houses with ceremonial and social centers, which were called kivas. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the future, especially during the Spanish settlements and things like that. The building of monumental architecture by the Anasazi would happen after the absorption of the Mogollon between 1200 CE and 1400 CE. Still, around 1100 CE, the Mogollon shifted from their semi-subterranean pit houses to above-ground adobe-style buildings the Spanish would call pueblos when they arrived about a half a millennia later. Agriculture, pottery, and adobe building style intersected as part of their regional culture, and again, elements of material culture move through this center place. Like we said, cotton, feathers, animal fur, all these things used for yarn, constructing blankets and clothing. Basketry becomes very common in California. Maybe we'll talk about that moving forward. All of these things are essentially cross-cultural. You have coastal regions who are very good at basket weaving, but then you have that all the way into western Arizona, and along with extensive inventory of stone, wood, bone, shell artifacts. All of these things are part of the local economy, but many of these things are either being imported or exported to other regions. Now we're going to move our focus to Pattaya culture. Patayan culture is also present in this region, which extends from southern and Baja California into western Arizona and into southern Nevada. Their name, loosely translated from the Yuman Kochimi language, means old people, which I like that one. That one's pretty cool. They are one of the least studied pre-Columbian groups due to what Harold Colton called the Patayan problem almost a half a century ago, which is the varying ways of life within the Patayan tradition. That includes their settlement patterns, material culture, ways of sustenance, could vary from group to group. So they didn't have like we only do agriculture. They're like, we'll do whatever it takes, which again is pretty cool. So the first phase of Patayan culture occurred from 700 to 1050 CE. This is known as the Patayan One, when agricultural communities using pottery lived along the Colorado River. From 1050 to 1500, we have Patayan II. The culture starts to spread north to Nevada and west to Arizona and into the region of California's Salton Sea. During the Patayan III period, large populations expanded along the Colorado and Gila rivers, and by the end of the Patayan I period, around 1000 CE, they are living and coexisting within the Hohokam communities, creating indigenous multicultural landscapes of collaboration, which is what you would expect of groups seeking not only to perhaps make peace with one another, but also seeking to trade with one another. Some of the older cultures, especially the Hohokam, are a very wealthy community, we could say, in the indigenous world. Now let's focus on the Fremont culture. The Fremont culture was a mix of other regional cultures inhabiting Utah and areas of Idaho, Colorado, and Nevada from roughly 300 to 1300 CE. The Fremont were generally hunter-gatherers eating native plants, fish, and mammals. We're talking about bighorn sheep, bison, all the way down to rabbits and everything in between, while supplementing their diet with the agriculture of the Three Sisters: corn, beans, and squash. They lived in pit houses with roofs made of brush. They made rod and bundle style baskets, tightly woven. These are very unique to the Fremont themselves. I will add one of these pictures in the notes for you to see. But baskets, agriculture, and architecture appeared to be the unifying force between the Fremont and other Oasis American cultures. Now I want to turn our attention to architecture, because architecture is a good reflection of cultures and where they're at and what type of direction the civilization is going. The basket maker period of the Pueblos saw the engineering of weaving baskets, hence the name. Basket maker period makes sense, right? Easy way to remember. And they made other things as well, things that were very useful, things like sandals, other items made, mats and things like that to lay on and sit on, and all those other things. Basically, the use of whatever they could find in their environment and adapt it to make their lives more comfortable. And I guess, when we look at ancient people, we tend to see them as being different from us, but really, in a lot of ways, they're just trying to live a more comfortable life, and so they take things in their environment and adapt them to hopefully do that in a certain way, in ways big and small. More advanced Pueblo cultural development started roughly around this time, 900 BCE, when they occupied the area through hunting and gathering before a place would emerge called Chaco Canyon. So around 200 CE, small two-bedroom pit houses begin to appear and evolved by 500 CE, with pit house villages of 20 to 80 pit houses appearing in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. Now, if you want to, you can go on your Google Maps, check this out from the aerial perspective. It's magnificent whether you're on the ground, and even the recreations are rather fascinating to look at, because when you think Native America, and I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions of Native America, is that they were primitive and they were just kind of like, wearing loincloths and eating whatever, finding whatever, just kind of milling around, living in teepees. But Chaco Canyon gives us a different perspective. When you're talking about Chaco Canyon, you're talking about like a literal massive city center or place of worship, a large trade center. You're talking about music, you're talking about foods, you're talking about all different types of items coming from Mesoamerica, California, modern Wyoming, and they're all intersecting at this place called Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. And even when you think about the Spanish and their creation of their own cities, when you're talking about places like Albuquerque or Taos or along their trade routes, it was no different in the ancient world. It's just sometimes, like, for example, the El Camino Real is seen as like a Spanish trail, when in fact it was actually just an indigenous trail that was adapted by the Spaniards, and then they named it, and the name stuck. That's kind of what they say, right? If you name it and say it enough times, I guess it'll just stick, and then you'll get the credit for it. But let's go back to around 700 CE. This is the point in time when architecture starts to change and walled cities start to emerge in adobe communal houses. These places called what the Spanish called pueblos. Why'd they call them pueblos? Cities, villages? Because that was their comprehension. And that happens a lot of times. The Spanish will come in, they'll write these things down because, again, no written language in the American Southwest, and that becomes the historical record, right? I mean, that's literally what a historical record is. It's something that is actually written down and can be passed to generations, and then it becomes kind of like the Spanish interpretation of these people. But I mean, we're talking about this monumental center that ends around 1150 to 1250 CE. Of course, again, we'll talk about drought and those things, but we're talking about a place called Great House sites. They're these huge places of worship, places of trade, places of festivals. And, I can only imagine going back in time to around 800 to 1150 CE. And Chaco Canyon is this major cultural center of this great ancestral Pueblo culture. You're talking about all the old cultures, all the old ideas and things like that, all kind of converging on this, in their world, it's a World's Fair, right? Distinct agriculture, astronomy, art, monumental buildings, hubs of trade, ceremony, administration, fire-lit pathways to get there. I mean, you're talking about like a real sophisticated, people even now go to like Burning Man, right? Like you're talking about like a Burning Man, but on steroids, with like real Native American people who had real culture, who weren't just like Swifties, or no offense to Swifties. But I have one living in my house, but you're talking about like real interesting cultures that are converging and trading and enjoying each other's company and doing ceasefires and just boom, here's this big, powerful explosion of cultures not colliding in a warlike sense, but like colliding in like a Big Bang sense, right? So, and when you look at the architecture of some of these ancient places, yeah, there's this misconception that Native Americans didn't build anything, right? That this land was completely empty. But then you have places like Mesa Verde in southwestern Colorado, and I'll make sure to put a picture in the notes of Mesa Verde. And this emerges around 1190-ish CE. And this is a large multi-story cliff dwelling with colossal stone walls where there are more than 4,000 archaeological sites in existence, 600 of which are cliff dwellings in this region. And they basically use natural cliff dwellings, carve them out, and create this massive fortification. Why? Because they can defend it much easier. And that's what these cultures did. They built, they created. They weren't just, sitting there hanging out. And there are people who will go to places like Mesa Verde and they'll go like, wow, these Native Americans were so short. Visitors go through these doorways, which are rather small for contemporary people. But at the time, you're looking at the average person being 5'5", the average man being 5'5", average woman being 5'1". But that was the general height of Europeans at the same exact time. So, again, like these misconceptions happen. Even I'll tell the story about going to Paul Revere's house. And if you haven't met me in person, I'm rather tall. I'm the 6'2", 6'3"-ish, depending on my shoes, I guess. And I'm walking through Paul Revere's house, about to exit, and the docent's like, "Stop!" And I'm like, and I just keep walking. I didn't think she was talking to me, and boom, I hit my head right on the door ceiling, right, like the door seal, and because Paul Revere was tiny too. You're talking about someone my size would be a giant in the colonial period, and that's why people like George Washington had such a great aura around them, because if everyone else is 5'6", 5'5", 5'1", and you're 6'3", that's a big difference, in terms of the average person. So anyway, let's get back to Mesa Verde. Sorry to veer off there a little bit, but I think it's important because, again, there are a lot of misconceptions about Native Americans and Native American culture, Native American people, how they lived. And in a lot of ways, it wasn't that much different than European cities. Smaller, yes. Less advanced in terms of technology, yes, but they also didn't have access to China. They didn't have access to India. They didn't have access to all those other cultures that really helped fuel European culture. They didn't have the Egyptians. I mean, you're talking about cultures from all the rest of the world essentially competing against, 2 continents. There are 7, right? So that changes, how many people, population density. Anyway, let's get back to Mesa Verde. So the people of Mesa Verde also farmed like others around the globe. At Mesa Verde, farming occurred on the mesa tops, which remained home to the ancestral Pueblo for roughly 600 years. Migrations at Mesa Verde occurred around the same time migrations outside of Chaco Canyon occur. All of these things roughly happen around 1200 CE. And again, we'll get into the ideas of sometimes floods or massive droughts, and we'll talk about that after we talk about the Cahokia. But anyhow, so why this style of architecture? There are 3 primary elements notably necessary to all civilizations. So first of the 3, the big 3, is in order to have a civilization, you have to have food and water, and you must have secure food and water. There must also be procreation for civilization, making women equally as vital a resource as food to the maintenance of not only the food storage, but also labor and the expansion of a particular group. And then finally, if you have both numbers 1 and 2, you need protection, and that is paramount to maintaining each civilization's first 2 requisites. So if you have food and a substantial number of women, which means procreation, you're good. But if another tribe, again, like the Navajo or the Apache or later the Comanche come in and you have no protection, the first two are no good. So protection is paramount to maintaining each civilization's first two requisites. So they build these buildings, these monumental structures like Chaco Canyon. Well, Chaco Canyon's a little bit different, but Mesa Verde, and it reflects the needs to protect agrarian settlements. Even the Pueblo buildings, you're going to be in a pit house and somebody's going to attack you. They basically throw fire into your dwelling. But if you are talking about adobes, you're talking about flat rooftops. Now you could defend yourself with bows and arrows and keep raiding tribes away. Violent tribal invasions and raiding. Again, there's this common misconception, and I want to really focus on this because people talk about like Native America, specifically in North America. I think there's less of this kind of bias in Mesoamerica because people think of the Aztecs and the violence of their society. But when we talk about North American societies, people often, a lot of my students have said point blank, like, oh, they were so peaceful and, they didn't really war and stuff like that. That's a European construct that's imported. Well, that's not really the case. And even in a place like Oasis America, that was a very ongoing thing. And one archaeologist made this statement, and I found it pretty profound when I read it. It says, the absence of warfare should be surprising, not its presence, right? So let me read that again. The absence of warfare should be surprising, not its presence. So warfare is actually the rule, not the exception. And the conflict between the Pueblo and those of the Athapascan cultures that come down, the Apache and Navajo, present a clear case of those more inclined to sedentary conditions that made Chaco and Mesa Verde protect against more nomadic groups. Economic pressures lead to conditions where defensive strategies of the Pueblo turned offensive for the purposes of revenge. So imagine you're this agrarian society, you're peaceful, and they come and murder your whole family. Well, it's human nature to be like, I'm going to get you back. I'm going to give you that receipt. And that's what starts to happen actually in Pueblo cultures. So even though a lot of these tribes are not necessarily warring tribes, the incessant human desire for revenge, and again, this all appears very logical, right? Regional and social dominance in the landscape of scarce resources is it also always enhanced by outside forces who are trying to come in and raid your village. So it's no wonder that we see war as part of the human condition, even today when we're talking about there's wars all over the planet. I mean, in the United States, we don't see it on a day-to-day basis, but back in the ancient times, this was a common occurrence, and the Pueblo and other Native American groups were no exception. As Patricia M. Lambert notes in her article, The Osteological Evidence for Indigenous Warfare in North America, it is the osteological record of violence in the Southwest extends back at least 2,000 years to the early years of maize agriculture and increasing sedativism. Whew. Now, what does that mean? It means a correlation between violence and resources goes hand in hand. In the case of Pueblo natives, Lambert notes, violence includes cut marks from scalping, with a few scalps. Eesh. Other signs of trophy taking, projectile wounds, cranial fractures, body mutilation, and unburied bodies. The evidence does not make the Southwestern natives exceptionally violent, but it does show how antagonistic intruders can influence a cultural shift. Bludgeoning, scalps, and ears become trophies of achievement and reinforcing the idea of notably necessary elements of civilization. Lambert notes that some women and children were captured instead of killed. And again, it goes back to my big three: food, women, and protection being key elements of society. And of course, if you can attain one or three of those essentially make you rich, right? Even when you're talking about women, you're talking about labor as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about Cahokia. But the Pueblo continue to show us evidence of burned villages, violent death, and scalping seen in their architecture, kiva and rock paintings, and analysis of the dead as we moved into the 13th century. Now, it should be no coincidence that we see migration patterns as hostile violence increases during the Pueblo I period around 400 CE, and then we see a sharp rise in violence. Again, here comes that year, 1200 CE, at the abandonment of Chaco and Mesa Verde. So what is happening? The collapse after 1200 CE is so great that there is evidence of cannibalism seen at Sand Canyon Pueblo and Castle Rock in southwestern Colorado. What can we attribute this to? Quite simply, violent tendencies not brought by imperial or colonial conquests are the sign of fleeting resources. I'll say that again, fleeting resources. What does that mean? This meant that as resources become more sparse, violence will increase. This invoked by the depletion of assets by raiding outsiders, environmental factors, you have social infighting, or just a combination of all of those things happening all at one time lead to people becoming more violent. From the evidence we do have, there were massacres, an indication of the intensification of conflict, arguably due to the depleting of resources. And what are those resources? Well, food. Food is always the number one resource of any civilization. And again, we're talking about drought leading to less food leading to people in search of food and water, and then women, and then you need to protect yourself, and then it essentially it becomes a rolling stone of, you did this to me, I'm going to do this to you, and then I'm going to take your stuff, and then you're going to come back and take my stuff. And we start to see major examples happening after 1200. There is the example of Castle Rock in Colorado, and this occurs sometime between 1256 CE and 1285 CE, where 41 were massacred, and the Sand Canyon Pueblo, where there are 20 bodies that were recovered in a non-burial context. This means if they're not buried, that means the people were gone, right? But also, both of these situations at Castle Rock and Sand Canyon Pueblo show evidence of cannibalism, which shows if you're eating other people, it's pretty desperate in terms of food. There is also Casas Grandes in New Mexico that shows 127 bodies, and some estimate a massacre of more than 1,000, which would make it the largest prehistoric massacre in the North American Southwest. There could be little doubt that the medieval warm period that took place during the late 1200s caused climate inconsistency and had substantial effect on food production, which applied pressure to both the protection of tribal resources and the increased offensive violence. This period created climate extremes in specific areas, and as you can imagine, they are living in the desert already, hitting some areas harder than others, which we can see causing regional violence by the have-nots. And then it becomes a badge of, civil honor to say, well, I'm a provider and I can provide, I'll just go take it from somebody else. So then you have lots and lots of violence. So during the Pueblo IV period, Arizona and New Mexico after 1300, we see a major demographic shift, a reconfigured settlement pattern of material culture and cosmology. And you may know of a group called the Mexica, who would become known academically as the Aztec, migrated south from Aztlan to what is now Mexico City in the 13th century, which is within the parameters of this time frame here. Their common ancestors, the Comanche, come from the same Uto-Aztecan speaking people of the Togoyo. The Comanche, again, will rise in the coming centuries. But in lots of books, there are are debates on what exactly happened in these regions, but I want to focus on the book written by Pekka Hamalainen, The Comanche Empire, where he's literally, I'm taking it word for word here. It says severe drought in the 13th century had vacated large tracts of the interior West. Straight up, drought. This displaying how environmental pressures funneled groups into areas where the competition for other resources leads to a clash of cultures, and you have these generally sedentary tribes turning to war with one another for the resources of water, because water means food, and then and food mean reproduction, and it's let's fight over these resources. So the ancient Americas were no different than any other place in the world, and this is a common occurrence. In the location of the Pueblo, we see similar abandonment and artistic expression that display an emerging theme, and that theme is war. So you have paintings, rock paintings, things like that. Even though we don't have hieroglyphs or a written language, we see paintings of shields, warriors, weapons, and the numerous portrayals of war-related supernaturals, with religion and warfare becoming increasingly and more commonly inextricably linked, as too does fertility and warfare that involve taking of scalps, involved in societal practices that transform scalps into rainmakers. So if I get this scalp, it'll rain, and then we'll have food, and then I'll be a champion of my people. And that's essentially what happens here. As those of the North American West flee southward, we see that the adaptation of Mesoamerican related ideology that interwove conflict with the belief system involving rainmaking. So human sacrifice, things like that, they all start to become one thing. And people are essentially in great fear, looking for a way out, and they're hoping that the supernatural could provide that for them. So our look at Oasis America should be no different than that of other cultures worldwide. There were farmers, exchange of culture, love, war, art, all of these things that express their existence in the world. In the Americas, Oasis America was the center of the world. But it was also a place of adaptation to ever-changing climate environments, evolving culture through contact with other cultures, and the constant desire to understand the meaning of their lives and of their world. Like the world's tribes, they were not simple or ignorant of the complexity of their world. We should also leave the door open to what we don't know and what we don't understand of this Native American region, leaving the door open for the possibility of a better understanding that expresses the layered intricacies of Oasis America. Until next time, goodbye now.